All right, we still have just a few more minutes. Oh, thank you. You remember this. Sorry, can we please get a few minutes? Oh, so you put it that way. Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Now, I first wanted to start with letting you know that we have a special guest. Sorry. This is Associate Professor Michael Henderson. Ooh, you're going to get a clap. Oh, well done. Now, given that this unit is about pedagogy and assessment, one of the things that we do in the faculty is we do things like evaluate other people's teaching or share practices. And so Michael's here to just kind of give feedback and watch my teaching. So he's not here to look at what we're doing, so don't worry. Maybe just Cole, maybe he'll be watching Cole. But so he's going to sit back, and this is one of the things that we think is good practice about being able to kind of share with our colleagues, provide support, provide feedback on practices. So and hopefully maybe that's something that you'll do in your own classroom. Now, let's just talk a little bit about where we've been and where we're going. So we are week 4, if you didn't remember, we're week 4, which is quite amazing because that's, I think about this in the 12-week span. And so it's only 2 more weeks and we're halfway finished. So, you know, it goes by very quickly. Now, we have been looking at English as an international language, and that was our online component. Then we looked at how languages are learned, and then the community of the classroom. This week, we're now focusing on curriculum, syllabus, and lesson planning. And why do you think we're focusing on lesson planning? Yeah, because we have to, yeah. And also because we are preparing for this assessment task, which is a lesson plan, right? And one of the reasons why we're building up to this is we're really looking at understanding these concepts. We talk about communicative competence, but knowing that when we build communicative competence in our students, we're focusing on both meaning and form. So we're looking at the skills, but we're also looking at grammar and forms. But the idea is that if we understand all of these concepts, then we can apply them to our own pedagogical approaches. And then we can also adapt this for our own teaching context. That's a huge part of this unit, is knowing that I will model different ways and different approaches, and that's one of the things that, as I told you before, I will try to model what I would do in a classroom. So as we learn about pedagogy, I will actually do the types of things that I would do in a classroom, but also knowing that that's not always appropriate for all contexts. So one of the things to reflect on is how is this being used, and how might I modify it for my own teaching context? How will I modify it for the various learners in my classroom? You would have read something this week about young learners. So tell me, how many of you in here are planning to teach young children? So I'm talking like primary or elementary school. Okay, Angie, right? So a few people. So the idea that the way that we approach teaching and assessing language might be slightly different for working with adults compared to young children, to adolescents. Okay, so understanding these different contexts. So this is really the first part of this unit. So where we're going. Next week we have another online unit, which is metacognition. Does anyone know what metacognition is?
Thinking about thinking.
Yes. Okay, well done. Thinking about thinking. So what does this look like in TESOL? And how do we encourage this as teachers? Then week 6 is principles of learning and assessment. So this is where we start really tackling assessment. Now, I do have to let you know that that week I'm not going to be here. So we have the lovely Dr. Kim Dang, who will be here. But that also means that I will still be available on email and so on, but I will not be here week 6, but class will go on as normal. And then we'll be looking at the different macro skills, so listening, speaking, reading, and writing, in regards to both the strategies that we might use in teaching it, as well as assessment. And we also look at vocabulary and grammar. So this is this will go by very, very quickly, given that I won't see you in week 6, won't be until week 8. But I did want to let you know that as we prepare for the assessment task, which is due September 1st. Oh, see, you knew that one. September 1st. I'm here, I leave on September 1st. Okay? So I'm going to be in Europe presenting at a conference. And that means that I leave that day. So if I'm going to be leaving that day, that means you have to be a little bit organized, which I'm sure you all will be. And if you do have any questions, you need to let me know beforehand. The other thing is that I know that at this time, there are things happen in our life, and we need extensions and so on. And I'm usually very, willing to give these extensions if you have a proper, reason why. And particularly because I think the key is that I want you to do the best that you can on this. But you also have to be prepared. So start working now. And that's one of the things I want you to do this week, is really come up with a timeline of what you need to do now and tomorrow and the next day to make sure that you get things ready. And maybe have the assignment done in time so that if you have any burning questions, we can either meet up in week 5 on campus, or we can email back and forth. Okay, so make sure you're organized, because I'm happy to give you feedback, but you'll have to get organized week 5. All right. The other thing is you're making some really lovely connections with one another, so you might think about getting a little study group together. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about assessment, but that idea of getting feedback on things, getting people's perspectives on it before you send it in, okay? All right, so to get things started, we're gonna do a little activity, and it's called, wrong one. Quiz trade, or more question trade. Has anybody heard of this? Yes? Okay. So the idea of this is everyone's going to get a card. Okay? And Mia has a card, I have a card, and I'm going to ask her a question. So why did you decide to become a teacher? And the answer is a question mark, meaning there's no specific answer. So she can just freely answer that question. Okay? And then she will ask me a question. And I think it's a more specific one. That's about how many countries in English, approximately how many countries is English the official second language? Okay. And if you don't know it, then she can help you because she already has the answer, because the answer is on the key on the card. And then we do the trade. So quiz, trade. So then we trade and we go to someone else. Now I know this is going to be very difficult, but that means that you have to get out of your chairs. Okay. If you get out of your chairs, you'll get a card. So then you should go around to maybe like 10 different people. Okay, and then we're going to discuss more about why would we do an activity like this? Would we do an activity like this? And so on. But the idea is that some of this content comes from what you've read. So you're kind of learning and reviewing at the same time, plus thinking about how we might use this as a technique in our own classroom. All right, so first of all, stand up. All right, so I know you will probably ask the person next to you, and that's okay. So go ahead and begin. Go ahead, find someone, pair up, read your card, pressure the top, answer on the bottom. Ask that student, then they respond to you, they ask their question, trade, go find someone else. All right, begin.
Why is this?
All right, ask one more person and then go ahead and go sit down. All right, go ahead and have a seat. So thinking about your students that you've taught or your future students that you will teach, how do you think they would respond to an activity like this? Okay, so do you think they like it? Do they like being active?
Yeah, especially the younger kids.
Good. Anyone else? How do you think students that you've either taught or that you plan to teach would respond to an activity like this?
I think it will work well in such a group like adult group, but for the kids, it will be like they will be all chaos exactly. And I think they're just talking or like they're not really answering.
Yeah, it's kind of easily distracted.
Exactly.
So what would you do with that? How might you create some boundaries?
Like rules.
Make some rules, this is what we do, this is what's expected, this is what's not, what we should not
Checking
do.
on them.
Yeah.
Just walking near them, see what they do. So they would kind of be more serious.
Did that work with you when you were a child? See, I have one child who really wants to do the right thing, and the other one that actually, if they saw me walking by, they would try to do something a bit naughty, just to get their attention. So, but yeah, I mean, part of it is thinking about, how would this work with different groups? So obviously this, is requiring some reading. So that might be difficult if you have young learners. Could you use pictures? So you can use pictures. And they have to, so there's lots of different things. And this is the key, is that sometimes I think the best and most effective teachers hear or learn about something and you go, how can I change that just a little bit to really suit my context? And that's the thing that makes really good activities, because you're connecting it with the students that you know what they need, and you're kind of gleaning or taking these ideas and making it appropriate for your context. And almost all things need to be somewhat kind of changed a little bit to suit context. So in this activity, what language skills are being practiced here? Speaking, listening, reading. And that's the thing, is then you might think about how you add writing to it. Maybe there's something where You know, there's some questions, and it says, and then they have to go write about the card that they end up with. Maybe it's a writing prompt. That question, they have to write something about it. So there's lots of different things that you can think about. And so then the last question is more kind of reflective for you, thinking about your teaching context and how you might change it or adapt it. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to review and kind of think about some of the readings. So we had 2 articles, and then we had 2 chapters in a book. But as well, if you want to also discuss some of the readings that you had last week, if you know those were interesting and you had some things to talk about. So the idea about this is I've put some markers on your table, and thinking about one thing that you've learned from this week's reading. And you can kind of put some of your ideas on there, just on the tables. I'm only going to give you 5 minutes, so it's just like a quick brainstorm of thinking what was something that was new, that you learned, that you thought was a moment of, oh, interesting. Hopefully you had lots of moments of, oh, interesting. All right, so I want you to, at your tables, brainstorm some concepts, ideas, thoughts that you read about this week. All right, 5 minutes, go. Did everyone finish the roll? Yeah.
So we can share.
So you're going to teach young children. Yeah, like younger children. And it could be people. Okay, so and is that what you would like to teach in the future? Yeah. You have your challenge on your son.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's does happen. It's finding that balance between like the content and the behavior management. more sensitive to each age, the better the learning experience. So that idea, and I think you're correct, like all like, particularly young learners, because if you think about young children, like the way that they explore their world is very much by their senses, not just through view. So, but we kind of forget that as they get older. So, you know, I definitely agree. Are you saying you haven't read yet? Surely not. And I do think that like, there are a lot of feminist discussion about young children in particular that can be difficult because of the ages. But I think there is I read the feedback. Yeah, because the parents so in the mainstream so do you want to teach children well, that's good. It's always good to be a mother. Right, one more minute. And that's what, if you read anything from the US, usually so a lot of literature all right. We're going to stop there. Any kind of aha moment, something interesting that you want to share? That's the key, that you'd like to share. Anything interesting that you're reading, you thought, very interesting. Okay, yes.
Here we discuss CLT and CLIL.
Yes.
So as we know that CLT is we teach English through CLT, which means CLT is you teach language. You teach language, but in CLIL you do not teach language, but you teach language. We teach language through language. So it means that we don't only teach English per se, but we also teach the content. So we in CLIL communicated content language integrated learning. So students are not only learning language itself, but also the content. So like teachers that teach in this kind of class should be good at the content and in the language.
Has anybody ever been part of a CLIL classroom or a classroom that, you know, because a lot of times it would be something like they're teaching science and language. So, and it's not just about using English as the mode of it, but they're actually very cleverly teaching about the language, but not explicitly, but through the content. Has anybody ever seen a classroom or been part of a classroom like that? Oh.
So I've been teaching like teaching a drama class.
Okay.
Yeah, but through English to actually Well, I think to them, they had most fun about like acting and stuff, but also like we need to tell them what to do because they have lines. You need to follow the rules and you need to express the lines while doing your like your parts of acting. So, well, I don't know if that necessarily what you want.
No, but I think that's when you take any kind of content and you use language, and it's more of just because I think that increasingly we're trying to kind of move away from this idea of an English language classroom. I don't know what your experience was like learning English, but a lot of times there was a speaking class, a listening class, a reading class, and a writing class. The skills, or maybe a grammar class. And they were all taught separately and in isolation. But then it was kind of like, well, actually, that's not really authentically how we learn language. So let's do more integrated. And so we're evolving in our ideas of how this is working. And now clearly that idea of like, well, do we have to just use explicit language, as a class, but can we actually include content? Can we, and interestingly, this is what happens, whether they like it or not, but students that come, for example, to Australia and have limited language proficiency have to learn the language through the content that they're learning, but not only, sometimes it's not as explicit or as scaffolded or supported as it could be. The idea is that we can actually learn language through content. We see this a lot in ESP, or English for specific purposes, like business English, and that sort of thing. So combining the content with the language.
Do you think this kind of trend, because this is so popular in urban context, right? Do you think that this like clearly will replace traditional English teaching approach?
I guess it depends. I think CLIL has had a huge following in a lot of kind of, like Australia and the US and the UK. But I don't know if it will have a big, how popular it will be in English as foreign language context. And so that's a really interesting, that's in itself a very interesting thing to explore is why. But as you'll see, and it's interesting because, in the forum when we were talking about CLT, I always find, communicative language teaching is always a very interesting idea because I think in a lot of, I know in China this has happened, I think in Indonesia it's happened, but a lot of countries, policies and curriculum have been changed to be about communicative language teaching. Now, just remember that communicative competence is not the same as communicative language teaching. Communicative competence is that we can communicate with one another. But communicative language teaching is very much about approach. And most of you talked about this in the discussion forums about this, the strong and the weak CLT. Can you remember what the strong CLT was?
It's about writing and reading something, so we go into it.
Yeah. So we often think about CLT as just talking in groups, a lot of just speaking and listening. But this idea that CLT can also be about engagement with texts, and we can communicate through our viewing of texts and through our production of texts. Okay. But interestingly, CLT is still a very kind of Western idea. And there is so much literature about teachers learning all about CLT and going back to their countries and wanting to, and the students were like, no, I don't, like, it doesn't work. Okay? So this is why I made the point that you have to be able to look at these different things and go, okay, this is a really interesting approach. I really like it, but how do I use it to modify it to fit my teaching context? And the reason for that is that one, these things are kind of, they might work in one context, but not so much in the other. Not that they can't work. I'm also a believer that I don't like to just use one approach. I use different things because it's about the purpose. In your lesson plan, you are going to have to identify, some outcomes and some particularly communicative and linguistic objectives, okay? So depending on what you do is based on the purpose. What do you want your students to be able to do? Now, if that is to use a communicative language approach, that is great. But if you can use something else to fit that purpose, and to meet the needs of your students, then you use that. We'll, throughout the thing, talk a little bit about task-based learning, which has kind of it's become much more popular because it's a bit more, gaining a little bit more popularity than CLT was. It's a bit more flexible in how it's used. In some ways, I use a task-based approach, and I coordinate things by activities. And I use activities as both exploratory, but also to provide explicit instruction. So task-based learning is a little bit like that. But I like the idea that there are different activities or tasks that kind of generate the learning outcomes that I want. Okay? All right. Any other kind of key things that were really interesting about the reading that you want to share before we move on? This is your opportunity. We only get to see each other every other week, so this is your chance. No? Okay. Sydney Moreau, no? Fine? Okay. Oh, yes.
Task-based learning is really great because in the stage of cognition, it's fast growing, it's easy for them to understand, and because they're so young, they want to interact, so it's the best way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and this is an interesting thing, actually. I'll engage our guests here, because I know the university is really big on something called active learning. And it's all about active learning, okay? And active learning is a great concept, but it looks so different in different aspects and how it's done. So, you can be very active and learn absolutely nothing. So I think it's knowing, and that's where we're talking about lesson design. And part of your assessment task is to justify why you do certain things. So if you're going to use a task-based approach, that's great, but why? Why is it great for students learning? Yes, it keeps them active, but it also kind of, in some ways, a task keeps things quite structured. So it gives some kind of activity to kind of structure and really allow you to align what the purpose is. And go, okay, we're going to do this task because we want students to be able to complete this task, which shows me that they can demonstrate this. Okay? So that's one way to think about it. Thanks, Sydney, for bringing that up. All right, now we're going to do another activity called a jigsaw. And again, this is another thing that you might use in your classroom to either review information or get students talking about a particular topic or create something. So again, this is another kind of task. And it's just a mode or a way of doing it called jigsaw. So we're going to be using our topics about syllabus and curriculum. And this is how it works. First, you're going to get, and we'll see how the numbers work out because this is always a bit of an interesting one, but we'll be flexible. First, you're going to get a group of 4. Okay, now I know that doesn't necessarily, that suits you guys quite well. It doesn't always suit your table groups as well, but you can sort this out. So the way that this works is that you get into a group of 4 and you decide who in your group is going to be responsible for gathering particular information. Okay, so because this group is a nice group of 4, I'll use an example. So that's for you, let's say you say, I really want to look into what is the difference between curriculum and syllabus. Now, you're not tied to this, I'm just giving an example. And you assign yourselves one of these. Okay, so everyone has something. Okay, all groups of 4, they decide what they're going to do. The next step is, and I'll come back to this in a second, is that then, actually we'll go back. Everyone that chose what is the difference between curriculum and syllabus come together because you are going to be the experts. Okay, so let's pretend that Destry and Mia and no name tags. Right, I'm going to. You're at this table. I have to try to find this table. Tina, I know you. Oh, I need that. And Aldo. Okay, so they were all number 1s. They're going to come together, and they're going to talk about what is the difference between a curriculum and syllabus. Now, how are they going to do this? They might talk about it from their own, what they know. They might find stuff that they've read about it, because we've read about this, and you're going to come up with something. The same people will do it for the objectives and the good lesson plan and the learning theories. Then magically what happens? So that group becomes such an expert. You are the, you have all the knowledge. And then you go back to your groups of 4. So this group comes back together and you get to tell everyone else about what the difference is between curriculum and syllabus. And you get to talk about, and why is this important? Why would this be helpful? Why would we use this as an approach? Just because I want you to get out of your chairs?
All right, are you bringing the necessity for sharing information?
So you're sharing information and it provides opportunities. For example, let's say Tina is really shy, okay? And she's maybe not so comfortable about, what she knows, okay? Which is not true, because I know she knows a lot. But let's say she's feeling a bit or maybe she didn't do her reading, because I know nobody would have not done her reading. But let's say she hadn't done her reading. And so she's feeling a bit worried about it. But then Tina goes into this group and everyone's sharing. And so then she's listening and she's even writing down notes, writing down notes. And then she gets to come back to her group and present and be the expert. Okay. So again, this can be quite effective for young children as well, particularly those who want to, children love to be experts on things, but also for adults. But you get that support and that scaffolding of learning about it as a group. So it's not just one person, but you're working together to kind of gain information. And then you get to go back and become the expert in the group. And so that's how a jigsaw works. Again, this may be something that you could or could not use in your own classroom. But again, it's just another type of activity you might use. So with that said, I want you, and I will come try to help organize. Think about your group of 4, which aspect you're going to look at. And then in about 1 minute, we'll go into our expert group. So everyone doing the curriculum syllabus will come together, and the second one and the third one will. All right? Okay. So one person might come over to this group. Okay. And actually what I might do to you and be with these lovely ladies. Okay. And one person is going to join this group here. Okay. So just go stand over next to them, Cindy. Yeah. Stand wherever you are. Yeah, you can come maybe come with yours. All right, so now you need to find out who is doing which one. Okay, so assign each other. Do you know? The negotiation. My 2. Vote. All right, so once you find out who you would like, let's have the 1s over this area, the 2s, the 3s, and then the 4s. Okay? But don't move. Are you 1?
Yeah.
Okay. Here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. The 3s are that table there. 2 is the middle table. Are you question 1? Oh, question 1 is over. Oh, okay. All
future materials, learners, resources, teachers, all of these things together could be curriculum.
Like just
Actually, in the next week, there are several types of but in the first two, we only have about 4 hours. Yes, because they communicate from so linguistic, these example so to practice something, practice a language. Like the previous we have and it includes maybe materials, equipment, other than yes, I would say we give an example of showing the communication. The topic is actually directions or towns. So having it's for objectives, more like
like forms, so you can have task-based
I know. The student are assessed in terms of their reading skills and grammar.
yeah, it's subjective usually disclosed.
So maybe like another approach would say, so because you know, in this classified this traditional syllabus doesn't mean that it is outdated. It depends on the content. So there's no root organic approach. It all depends.
Have you ever seen it being used to like in the same yeah, that kind of thing. Have you ever seen that? Yeah.
like when you design, like when you use like
Yes, syllabus could be supported by a variety of techniques and methods like cost-based, process-based, and multi-dimensional, something like that.
It's one of those things I've seen them both used interchangeably sometimes. Depending on where you go to, use them to sort of mean the same thing. So then they probably haven't done this list.
What would you say the unified is? Because in America we would usually just say the word syllabus.
It's like a unit guide that you want to write. Without that.
All right, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds to wrap up final notes that you're ready to talk about to your group. 30 seconds.
Why is it? Because I think the whole class design is based on.
Have you seen the lecture that the syllabus components or like subject matter
With that objective design
and methodological and also functional and functional, they both all of them together is integrated together.
That's why it's always the title, always the unit second one you want to aim, this one's applying this one. So it just helps you.
All right, go ahead and go back to your original group of 4 and get ready to present your expert information. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Listen to me.
Education system.
what is it serves as a goal for teachers to in the achievements. And also it gives the teachers the direction, what approach should they choose and to arrange the time in the lesson. Very important. And some examples, for example, the first one is linguistics, that is using the context previous experience about grammar. It tells students what should they learn. And refer to the lesson plan, teachers can have this strategy and the foundation to select the approach to teach. So what approach, pedagogy to choose, and what time should it be read. Yeah, because some objectives are really wasted time, not wasted time, to use a lot of time. Like you need to use a past tense to discuss previous experience. It costs a lot of time, so you need to arrange your time and teach. It's very important.
All right. So hopefully we're able to share some of your ideas. So just as a quick recap, because I want to make sure that the second half of the class we have time to really take a look at the assignment, which I'm sure you're looking forward to. But just the question, did everyone in this, if we use the term active learning, was everyone active in this activity? You were kind of forced to, that everyone presented, right? In the end, because this is the interesting thing about group work, because you can have a lot of group work and still have, like, do absolutely nothing, right? But this kind of puts the onus back on person that everyone had something to do and they had to actually be involved. All right, we're going to go ahead on to the next activity. So go ahead and go back to your original seats. And we get to start talking about assignment 1. How exciting. How are we feeling? Excited. Oh, good. Yeah, so he is excited. Worried. So actually, Heather brings a very good point up. Because I'm assuming that most of your assignments are due at the same time-ish, or before. Okay. So this always becomes an issue of how do I actually get things done and everything's due at the same time. Okay. So one of the things that we might consider, and you should leave today thinking about, again, a timeline of what you're going to do. We're going to actually look at some samples of assignment 1. Now, I'm going to tell you something kind of interesting about this, and I'll give you a bit of my own philosophy on things. Some lectures really don't like to give samples. But why do you think they might not want to give samples? Yeah, they don't want to, they don't want you to just take this as an example that you can follow it exactly. Okay. All right. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah. So
to like see everyone doing the same thing.
Right. Now, with lesson plans, I feel like it's a little bit different because if you are really taking this opportunity, because what I really want you to do is I want you to think about, because some of you haven't had teaching, a lot of you have had teaching experience, but some of you haven't. So I want to really think about the classroom that you want to be in. And this is your opportunity, because some of you may go back to a classroom, for example, in China, and you have to use a textbook, and you have to do that sort of thing. This is your opportunity to really experiment with your ideas, with your context. So this should be something that is super unique to you, because you know your context. And for example, Angie's context is probably going to be different than Hakeem's, okay? So it's going to be different. And also because you have to justify why you're doing things. And why you're doing it not only because of the literature, but because of your context, because of the age of your students. So really there should not be a lesson just if you are focusing on a particular outcome and a particular context. They should look very different. So I don't mind you using samples, but I don't want it to actually hinder your creativity. But I hope it might spark some ideas. I found it really interesting in teaching because some of the best things that I've done in teaching has been taken off ideas of other people that I've kind of made it my own. But we get really funny about it, in other aspects of going, oh, well, we can't copy, maybe that sort of thing. And obviously, you can't copy because it's called plagiarism, and there's actually a whole process that we have to go through. So I don't encourage that because you will then fail. But to be able to be inspired by other ideas is okay. But mainly, this next activity that we're going to do is to familiarize, to get yourselves understanding the rubric. Because the rubric that we're using, now in the unit guide, it has some criteria, but the criteria is put in a rubric. What do I mean by a rubric? It's a rubric. Yes, and it's very specific because basically, in the case of a rubric, it will have certain criteria and criteria across different levels, which in this case is HD, D, C, B, okay? So you can see where you are and you can map yourself on this. Now, what I would be suggesting to you is that we're going to get to know the rubric, so then you know exactly what you're being assessed on. One of the things that students always worry about is, am I on the right track? I'm going to give you a little hint. If you self-assess using the rubric, it's a pretty good idea. It'll help you understand whether you're on track or not. Because that's what I'm going to use. I'll have that rubric in front of me, and I'll look to see if you actually meet that criteria. So make sure that you are looking at that. So we're going to have that activity, and we're really kind of doing something called moderation. We'll talk more about this when we talk about assessment. But often what teachers do is we might have some students and we get together and we mark them as a group. And we kind of make sure that we're marking in a similar way to make sure we're being fair and that we're giving true marks that really represent the student's ability. Okay, so we're going to do that now. Now, I don't like to, I do try to be a bit more environmentally aware. So I've only made a few copies, but everything is in the assessment guides and resources. Okay, so we'll work in our table groups. I have some copies here that'll give, you know, each table one copy. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at these samples. There's 3. Okay? And we're going to kind of do something similar, is that your table will be given 1, 2, or 3. So you'll just be given 1. And in a minute, what you'll do is you'll get with another group that has a 2 and a 3, so you can kind of compare. But what you're going to do is first you're going to use the rubric to decide what mark you would give this. And so you're going to be the assessors. Okay? But I'll tell you, this will be a great way for you to figure out what you're going to be assessed on. Then you're going to discuss what are the strengths of the assignment and what are some areas for improvement. Okay? And you will have to try to come to an agreement together about where you think what marks this student should get. Okay? And then we'll get into other groups and compare those who had different samples. All right. So you might, if you do have a digital device, you can do that, but I will give you some. Which one do you have already? Oh, which one? Right. I'm going to give you. It's all online as well. You have the rubrics that you're going to assess on. I think that's oh, you mean for turn it in? Yeah, I changed the date to put it in, so it's down September 1st. And then turn it in until obviously, then we have to turn it in. No, you can't, but I didn't say that you can't get it before you had to put it. No, I okay, first. You will find that you described, and you look forward to it. I know you think it's going to be fun. I promise you. Once you put everything in the table, it'll take a Yeah, so that's the references, and that's the text citations. So that will just kind of say, so for example, this is supporting your ideas, but then they will reference them. So that's text citation. So you might, like, for example, let's say you decide to and you say, well, what is the effective way to, and you use a reference to support yeah, but then you have to use the reference. If you have questions as you go, I'm just going around, so feel free. Yes. All of this will be they are.
address the status of how it is rolling out past
This is about this really is and then the rest until the thing is more about the and then all right, so some of you who are very, very clever have realized maybe how the rubric is created. And part of it is part of the design of the rubric for the markers. But you will see that the first section, which is where 10 points, is about the introduction, the context, the rationale. So in here, you're not only talking about, so you've decided to do a lesson on, someone give me something. What's your lesson on? A topic.
That's my answer. That's my answer.
Very nice. We're going to continue on with that because this is about learning. So we're going to, even though we don't understand, we're going to keep going on. So the idea is that you want to say that you are, again, this is an aspirational lesson plan. This lesson plan is going to change the world, okay? So you are creating this lesson plan, you're trying different things because you've noticed a particular problem or issue. So, for example, in the classrooms that you've been in, or in particular classrooms in this teaching context, students rarely use intercultural competence. So they actually never hear accents from other than American and British. Okay, so let's say that, and so that's a real big issue. It's something that they've identified in the curriculum that they want to do. Okay, so your lesson plan is going to happen. So I'm just making this up as I go. And so you're providing a rationale. Why is this important? Why is this lesson? What is the purpose of this? Is it just because you need to finish page 54 on the textbook? No, it's not, because you're changing the world with this lesson plan. And this is your best shot. This is showing what you can do. So, and by the way, I know that this feels like just an assignment, but there could be a chance at some point that you're applying for a job and you come with various things and you say, well, here's an example of a lesson plan. And this is, that's a great thing that employers want to see, that not only can you provide a lesson plan, but that you can back it up with a rationale for why you do the things that you do. So hopefully you don't see this as just another assignment that I know some of you probably just do. But the idea that this is an opportunity for you to really kind of learn about why you might make particular teacher decisions, but that create a really interesting lesson. So that first section of the rubric, that first 10 points, is about the introduction and context and the rationale. So that's really that first part. The part about the planning is the following sections, which kind of talk about the duration, the level, the links to curriculum, you know, the board, how you organize the board, various things, okay? So that's about the planning, okay? And then the biggest part is actually the lesson. And the lesson consists of, and this is where you decide how you want to do it, but you basically have, you know, we often base it by activities. So, you know, here's this time, you know, for 3 minutes, you're going to have a icebreaker or something, okay, or an introduction. And so you use the table to do that, and then you talk about, you know, what are some of the anticipated problems and solutions. And this is always a key thing because, as you mentioned, Cole, sometimes you plan something and it doesn't work, okay? I'm going to show you a story, and it's probably maybe not the most appropriate, but I have young boys, so I talk about this all the time. I remember my first time teaching. I was at primary, so young children, year 3, so they were about 9, 10. And I was going to read this book, and it was this lovely book, I loved it, and I created about all these, I actually created workshops. And each workshop, they'd have some different activity on the book. Like I'd spent, I don't know, weeks preparing this, right? And so I'd bring them on, you know, on the ground, and they're all sitting there because they're so, you know, they're adorable 9-year-olds, you know, ready to listen. I start reading the story, and I've read a page, and then, you know, this way, a student passes gas. Okay. Yes. And then what happens? You know, and then laughing. So it's like, okay. You know. Yeah, I didn't say that. That would have been funny. And so, and this was my first time, my first lesson ever, and I was trying to get their attention again, and and then every time I finally thought I got them, and then you hear, and we had to completely just go on to something else. And it was my first thing of like, things happen. And I know I'm not talking about bodily functions happen, but things happen, particularly things like technology. Sometimes so you need to have a backup plan. So the idea is that with every activity, you anticipate what could go wrong. Things like, I was really lucky today because we have even numbers. And everyone perfectly went into groups of 4. But you know what? Then there's times that it doesn't, and then you have to kind of rearrange things. So anticipating, that's what a good teacher does. They anticipate what could go wrong and have a plan, okay? So that's part of the lesson plan. And then the rationale, why do we do it? So you might, as you see in some of these, how they've given the anticipated, you know, difficulties, and then also the rationale or justification of why you do it. That's all part of the lesson planning aspect. On the back of the rubric is about, one section is about like your referencing, formatting, and the organization of ideas. So we call it, you know, literacy sort of thing, and then the actual language, okay? Just a little tip. Some of you use computers where you have it in English and, let's say, you know, Mandarin or something. And so then it doesn't pick up always spelling mistakes in English. So just double check that. It doesn't take much to ask a friend or go down. There's Monash Connect. There's so many different resources here at Monash. So do use those. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to interrupt. Oh, last one about an appendix. You'll see I didn't add the appendices of these, the hard copies, but anything that you're going to use. So if you say, I'm going to use this worksheet, but you don't attach it, I have no idea what you're talking about. Any kinds of resources that you're going to use, even a transcript of a listening text, you need to include that in, okay? And that does not count as part of your word count. All right. I'll continue to add, those were just kind of some highlighted ones that I wanted to mention, but continue marking. And if you have questions, go.
This is the one. No.
How much more time do you need to come up with a score? 2 minutes? 5 minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, almost clear it. Maybe not. Okay, 3 more minutes to come up with a score. Trust me, sometimes I wish I was
So they might be like a student. So I think maybe like they have a
Yes.
they have
Who's planning to use the Chinese English curriculum or actually the Chinese standard? Okay. So apparently there was something that came out last year, right? And Seth will be your best friend because I remember last year when I taught this, it was really difficult to find assessment outcomes to link to, but in that, from last year, they have released this document, and it's in English as well. So, so if you have any questions about that, because that was one of the things that we kind of encouraged, particularly if you were teaching in China, to use the Common European Framework. But now they do have those assessment outcomes. So you might have a chat with Sun to find out where to locate those English statements to help with that framework. So well done on her. Well done. Yes. Appreciate it. All right. So now what we're going to do is I want you, this is going to get a little bit messy. I was going to have you deep into like find all three samples, but I'm just going to find one other person, okay, who has a different who did a different assignment than you. You can get kind of grouped in small groups and discuss what were some of the things that you noticed, what were some of the strengths, what were some of the things that you now know that you need to include, and that you're now aware of going through this process. Okay, so find someone else who has a different assignment or a different sample, and have a little chat. All right? So meet someone new. Yeah, and that's what you might do. Okay, well, like this one. So she's going to English and Japanese. So you might then talk about I think you can find stuff for each. How does that? So I'll show you some because the slides have some visual how to use it for right. So I'm going to upload that on the week 4 forum. So have a look for the English language standards for China, the Chinese language standards. All right. I know that you enjoyed this time so much, but there's a few last things. So go ahead, return to your seats. Now, you can go over some of this when you look at these slides later. But there was a question that came up in regards to how do it was Desiree, I think, was asking about how do I have to justify everything that I do for everything? Well, not everything, but, and then how do I find stuff for it? So a good thing is to be able to use the search function. So like there was an example that we found, it was saying, I'll give instructions in Japanese and English. Well, that's a great opportunity to say, why is it important to use both, if it's a Japanese class, why you would use both languages, okay? And what was the rationale? So that you'll find that there's actually a lot of things, but you may have to search different things. You might go, okay, I'm doing this because of this, but I don't, where do I find it? So you're going to then have to use the search function in the library to find things. So you can go through these slides on your own, but it's just a bit of a, a guide of how you would filter things and use that. So this is all online. You can use that. The other thing is the reference list. Now, in the section where you're justifying, you're going to have to use things like in-text citations. So knowing the difference between in-text and then the reference list. So you'll have those two things, okay? And just like little things that there's the and accent when it's in the parentheses. So knowing the difference between that's like a big APA thing. And you probably, for those of you who have been at Monash for a little bit, do you get a lot of feedback on your references? Or do you get clients taken off for referencing? Maybe some of you. Referencing because it's right or it's wrong is an easy thing to kind of say you either have it or you don't. So sometimes that will be something that people flag. But the nice thing is that the library has a really great and effective guide. So you really should be able to follow that. Now, I know that's an extra step and so on, but do check to make sure that you checked your citations. For next week, there's some different activities that you can do. If you haven't looked at Laura's video and so on, but I really want you to do something for me. And I want you to, maybe at the end of this class, I want you to think about what you need to do. And start creating kind of a plan of what you're going to do. If I was you, of course this is up to you, I would be thinking about getting together with some people and going, let's do a bit of a study group next week. We have an online class. Let's do a study group. And so we're going to bring drafts of what we've done. And we can kind of share and have a look and give some feedback. Because this is but that means you have to be organized. And if you can kind of prompt yourself to at least have something on paper, or even just some notes on paper, meet next week with a group of people. And then if there's any questions, you can always send me an email, or we can make an appointment next week. That's fine, I'll be around. But get that done, and then have that as a goal. And then you have another week to really finish it up. So just get this activity is really to get your head into it, figure out what you need to do. But now you need to start making a plan of what you're going to do. And I'm really big on, I'm a very structured person. So what I would be doing is I would be saying, okay, by this date, I want the first introduction and rationale done. Okay? So I'm giving myself until, I don't know, the end of the weekend to have that finished. And then I'm going to have this section done by this time. And then I'm going to have some key things done, however you want to do it. But, kind of managing my time will make it feel a lot better when you feel like you don't have a lot of time. And just, another thing is going, okay, I'm going to have 2 hours on Friday that I'm just going to focus on this assessment task. So these are just some kind of tips that might help you to organize your time. Because the more that you can get done now, if you have questions, you can ask. Because what happens is if you wait till the last minute, and some people do work best that way under pressure. I know my husband does, and it drives me crazy because I like things done. It's due on Friday, I like it done on Wednesday, and he will wait till the very last minute. So it's a bit of a clash sometimes. I end up doing a lot of his jobs because I can't wait. But I know some people work that way. But if you can kind of get organized, if you do have questions and you want to, giving yourself time to think about it, you'll give yourself that time to really refine the things and be quite proud about what you have to send it. Okay? And I will, I spend a lot of time on feedback. So I know that you've spent a lot of time on it, and I will give you the same respect in giving you, I spend a lot of time on the assignment. So, it's a reciprocal kind of relationship. You invest in it and I will invest in it as well. So do give your best. Any final questions that you'd like to ask before we finish up? Or you can wait to the end if you feel you want to ask me myself.
Let's meet up next week.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe that's what we can do now is start talking to each other. Come up with a plan. See if you can meet up. Come with time. Get some feedback. Send me a group email about the questions that you have. All right. Again, I look forward to. By the way, did you enjoy the discussion? Well, sorry, today, but also the online discussion. I thought that this last discussion was a bit more, the online discussion was a bit more engaging. It was good. I think it started out with Tina and Hakeem. Right? Yes. Starting it off, setting the tone. It was very nice. And I just want to that was one thing I wanted to tell you is that sometimes when I talk about it, sometimes I ask you a question. And it's not because I don't think you've given me enough, but I feel kind of strange in those interactions because I feel like there should be a continual exchange. Like, I'm like, well, that's really interesting. Well, what do you think about this? But I don't want you to think it's because you haven't been articulate enough, but I'm actually really engaged. So if I'm asking you questions, it's not because you haven't articulated what you wanted to say, but I'm actually trying to continue that conversation. Because one of the conversation was about questions. One way to engage our learners is that continual use of high quality questions. And so that's something we'll do. All right, make your study groups. Unfortunately, I won't see you week 6, but I will be here next week, so feel free to make an appointment. Kim will be here, and Kim is great. So you'll get a break from my voice for a little bit. Maybe that would be really great. But I will be so excited to see you in week 8. All right. Make those groups. Have a good week.
I was an arts teacher before, so I'm wondering what a teacher like brings into rental. Like maybe I can give them communities and like this wants to go to
You mean the third? I will go next week. It's Don't forget the snacks. Are you scared? Sorry, I was running away from you. I'm so sorry. I've given you 5 days, and now you don't need any kind of evidence. But if you go further than that, you have to rely on evidence, and you. So I'm not free to go for the 5 days, and then if you need more time, then you can just give me something. Because you would rather have a question. It doesn't matter. Yeah, go for 5 days. Okay, you have the first one. I'll change it to you. I will not be in this, so not go that. But if you want to make an appointment, just come send me an email.
like, yeah, it's like really yeah. Sometimes I could like, imagine yourself fucking in a toilet and screaming. Yeah, so mine is like not that painful. What I made it. I'm trying to say that. So when we actually it's very because I have lots of details. I don't think what kind of details, like how deep are we going to go as reference, because you said like every approaches should come with a reference. It's not based on it's like based on environment. So do we need a reference?
So you use a reference but just know that you're referencing something. Why? And a lot of it is more about why you're doing it. Like, you don't have to say, well, this is why I'm doing this because of this context. Because, doing it even Chinese students don't know the time.
What about like something that comes from the experience of someone else?
Share your answers. So you can say,
So if I need to use any of the technology, like for example, like a storybook or a Bible.
You also
Yeah, because when I was first, it wasn't like just like a piece of work.
Are you guys on the same page?
Right now,
Oh my God, yes, I still feel they all have to go yeah, I don't know.
talk about that one a bit later. I hope. Hopefully I don't need it. I don't want extra time. It's just I also get I'll try. Here. I know. Yes.
See you next time. It's like for my other side, that was nice. I see very well. Yeah, So then we just like didn't get me started. We also have there's a lot of points going forward. For the then we just use the yeah, maybe next yeah, each week. But okay, so we have a discussion on the last one is about I was kind of confused with this learning theory. But in that, I wasn't sure. I was about to ask how but the other one, GT. Oh, yes. We should be able to name
Well, I'm looking at some TA. So, I'm getting used to
I will not forget your name because my son's name is.
Okay.
But he speaks slightly different. Let me get a pen. So it's grammar translation. Method.
okay,
And that's fact-based learning.
because I would put task-based learning teaching.
But it definitely is like we want to.
I mean, I would put task-based learning as a teaching methodology. But so communicate.
But this is also my approach as well. Yeah. So these are more pedagogy, but learning theories is more about how they learn. So, that's where you can talk about passion, talks about, comprehensive input, and things like that.
I have a quick question. Do you want to peer review references? What references? I mean, are the articles necessary to be peer reviewed? Not really. So 5 is a minimum. Minimum.
Yeah. So you'll probably end up doing more. Hold that one thought, and I'm going to ask this before we.
Well, let's talk about that next time.
Yeah, but wait,
Oh,
because.
okay. I just want to talk to you about it.
Oh, yeah. That's fine.
No, it's okay. How are you feeling?
Right now, but like mostly I have experience
And the reality is that there is like a lot of meetings, so you don't feel like you have to do everything. And discussions are hard.
Yeah.
So, and if I'm just thinking of practically, I would just start working on this, and then because you're like, why don't you just email me what you have, and you can talk through some of the things, but we just focus on this, and then we can kind of work through some of that sort of stuff. Obviously keep up with the meeting, but I wouldn't worry about, like, I don't even miss anything, like, that's all stuff building towards kind of ideas.
Yeah.
But ultimately now this is the product. So if you want to start on that, and then we can just kind of go back and forth. And then I'll be here next week if you want to jump too. But maybe just kind of start on some things and I can have a look and see if you're on that track and so on.
Yeah. But I don't have a background in education and I haven't transferred from a different.
And that's okay, because come help me. So, I mean, it is harder because some people come in and you feel like, but that's okay, and that's where I can help give some advice. So, especially, because you have to do that. Okay, no, don't shut that too much. The idea is just to kind of play with it, kind of explore how you can work with it.
And is there any?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Send me an email so I can remember, but just send me an email. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yes, so I had one finished, she was actually looking at task-based learning in China. One was looking at international student experiences, how they, yeah, it's really interesting. She's from Japan. She's actually just looking at Japanese students. It's really interesting because she's trying to argue basically that, international students actually do a lot of, how like sometimes, particularly in a class, before all, there's like a lot of international students, but if you go to one class, international students, particularly like group work, like, oh, well, they're not as confident as whatever, and they're kind of looked at kind of like as, like not as a strength, and so her thing is talking about how actually international students have a lot of agency and what they do to kind of learn through some of the new things that they're doing. Like let's say they did, like there was one class because they were education, and they were finding that they had participation and they thought it was just enough to realize they had the way that they changed, the way they changed, the way that they kind of built these skills. And basically saying like they actually do accommodate a lot of things and they learn through the process. So that's really I have another person who is from Colombia and he's looking at another one who's looking at teacher practices another one who's looking at migrants and refugee children another one who's from Indonesia, and he is he's looking at creating professional development programs to help these teachers develop their knowledge of pedagogy and content and
how do I even establish a topic like this? I mean, concerning.
Something you're interested in, and it comes in weird ways.
Yeah, but how it suits like what you're trying to do. Like, for example, like what are your specializations?
Like my specific one.
Yeah.
Well, I look at policy stuff, but also I look at teacher practices. So like what happens in often migrant experiences, and then anything like even kind of how like teacher resistance, like how teachers, and that's why I like with policy, how sometimes the government will say they're do this, and how teachers make their choices. Sometimes they do it, and sometimes they resist, and how they resist. That kind of yeah.
So, for example, if I were trying to convince you to supervise me, like what should I do?
Well, the thing is that they develop these topics over time. For example, the one that's looking at international students, like her topic is a little bit different. If you're interested in that, maybe people haven't looked at. So, I mean, you're talking about drama.
Yeah, I took drama like 2 different classes, in basic classes. The advanced classes was going with Frankenstein, and the other one goes to with Alice in Wonderland. So basically, there were a lot of lines, but it also involved a lot of expressions that I'm not very familiar with because it's English grammar. And also there would there are some kind of language that come from different sources, like French, like things. It's not like what we're used to.
My doctor was looking at, so I don't know if you remember when the social IDG came out, and they were first going out, people were freaking out about the autism online bit. Things are so different, and so that's actually what I looked at, how the text changed teaching because they had to do online stuff, but they had to be more online. It was all like speaking English they never had before, so they had to do speaking more of the lessons, more speaking based, which is interesting. Before and after. But that was a problem. I wanted to see like what actually happened, like how usually like these tests are so powerful, like how does it have the power to change how teachers teach?
Actually, I volunteer to be like, I don't know, like they're trying to know how the students work, attitude or something towards the IDP test. Yeah, I volunteer to take the test and the analysis, my result and everything.
So yeah, I mean, I want this, right? And that's the thing, right? Now you know, so you can just come up with ideas and you go, hey, what do you do with it? And then I can say, yeah, I'm going to workshop it. And you can figure out, well, okay, well, maybe, you know, that's not very good.
It's flexible, so it's kind of flexible.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, if you already know someone, so like, I think when I had spoken, he had a couple of ideas, and I said, this one's a much better idea. Well, yes, so now everybody's doing, so he's looking at how the different types of knowledges, so you have pedagogy knowledge, you have content knowledge, you have knowledge of students, how you develop teachers, be able to be experts knowledge. But the thing is that because you're doing coursework, you have to do this graduate pathway.
I've got to apply for that.
But that's great, because what you do is that you have an initial project. And that's what you do with class, and you build, like, then you build on that. So you get kind of taste how to put it together into a small one.
So far, very amazing.
So think about it, go back and think about this, what are some things that nobody really looks at, what's a problem, what's a real issue, what's something, and what do you want to be known for? And that's what you do, like, you will spend so much time on this, what do you want to be known for? Like, if you want to be known as an expert, what do you, so don't do something that's easy, do something that you want to be an expert in. And that's tricky, too, because there's easy stuff, and then there's things that, but then there's ultimately, when they go, oh, he is the guy who does.
I know. I have some theories. I've always wanted to and of course that maybe like help me with my career, because I want to base my career here. So I think it would be a very good pathway. So I'm going to apply for the transition and then transfer to master of education, because that's how I start the research project. I just want to do my
Let's keep in mind that and we'll think of things.
Yeah, the GP said I might.
Without sugar, no sugar. Well, next week, after you get the good news that you're cleared and you're fine, and somehow it's magically disappeared. Then we'll have to.
Okay.
Then we'll learn how to find.
All right, I'll be a listener. Like,
You're gonna want to do a PhD after.
no, I'm not.
I still have lots of time. So.
I'm like teaching.
It's more like actually teaching, but I was like, I want to do something educational that has, it's not necessarily about teaching, research, contributing. Hopefully, like one day I'll be standing here.
Who knows?
Switching my identity.
Yeah. But that in itself is interesting language I didn't know about. Thinking, lots of things to think about.
You're so cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good. Are you enjoying the class?
Very much. Good. Like you said, it's my favorite one. Yeah, but it's not because of the text. Yeah, I think it's
Do take some more because
I could. I think it's because of the chemistry. I value this thing. I value these things very much because chemistry can decide a lot.
Well, and the thing is ultimately a good teacher connects with their students. And ultimately, like students you have to know your students, and if you're not willing to get to know your students.
Oh yeah, about that. So in a teaching plan about a lot of kind of things, would I be able to just address the relationship with me and the students? Like how we can establish a certain level of affection and how, because I do have like this co-class that's so used to the all English environment. So I'm just going to use I think there were like a lot of personal traits in that, such as I would just give them like 30 seconds just to stop everything and pick up a bottle, drink your water, kind of thing. And then, okay, 10, 9, okay, the countdown stop. Okay, put up your bottle and we go on, that kind of stuff.
And that's great, because that's a bit of personal culture, but also kind of saying, you're looking after. So that's not use that.
Because in that context, like, if they want to speak Chinese, they have to ask. So, but it also applied to me because if I want to express something like grammatically, so I have to say, explain to them like how.
And that's good because you model it, and I think that's the key thing, because sometimes teachers say that they want their students to do stuff, but they don't model it themselves, and I think that's important. And you could talk about that modeling.
So I guess that's what's really good when you have experience about that. I have like a image.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take care of yourself. Don't do anything too crazy. Find out what's happening.